The night my family celebrated my 29th birthday, my father stood beneath the golden lights of the Hawthorne Grand Ballroom and announced that my younger brother, Julian, was receiving the keys to a magnificent waterfront mansion, while I was handed a thin white envelope containing nothing but an old grocery receipt. Everyone applauded as Julian lifted the silver keys above his head, but when my father looked toward me with that familiar expression of disappointment, he had no idea that the quiet daughter he had spent years dismissing had already uncovered a secret capable of bringing his entire empire crashing down. My name is Claire Bennett, and for most of my life, I had been treated as the unnecessary branch of a family tree that revolved around my father, Richard, and his construction company, Bennett Urban Development, while Julian was groomed to inherit everything from the moment he could hold a toy hammer. I had deliberately built a separate life as an internal compliance analyst in Chicago, refusing my father's repeated offers to give me a meaningless executive title, because I knew that accepting his generosity would always come with a price, and I had learned long ago that independence was worth more than any luxury car or corner office. The birthday humiliation itself had been carefully designed, because my father had invited investors, relatives, business associates, and nearly every person whose approval he thought mattered, then spent the first hour praising Julian's loyalty and supposedly brilliant leadership before unveiling the mansion as his reward for carrying the family legacy. When he finally approached me, he smiled for the cameras, slipped the empty envelope into my hand, and whispered, "Maybe one day you'll understand that people who contribute nothing shouldn't expect anything in return," before raising his glass as the room filled with uncomfortable laughter. I should have felt devastated, but instead I felt strangely calm, because 6 months earlier I had discovered something buried inside a routine compliance report that my father had asked me to review after one of his lenders questioned several unusual construction payments. The numbers showed that millions of dollars were being transferred through companies that existed only on paper. Invoices were being duplicated under different project names, and several properties were being purchased through intermediaries connected to people inside the company. But the discovery that truly frightened me was finding my electronic approval attached to transactions I had never seen or authorized. At first I thought someone had made an administrative mistake, but after comparing archived emails, access logs, and digital signatures, I realized someone had deliberately created a trail suggesting that I had approved suspicious transfers and concealed financial irregularities. I immediately contacted an independent attorney and preserved everything without confronting my family, because I understood that if I accused my father too early, he would have plenty of time to destroy records, shift assets, and turn me into the scapegoat his carefully constructed paperwork already suggested I was becoming. For months, I quietly gathered evidence while pretending that I had discovered nothing, and every family dinner became an exhausting performance in which Julian bragged about new properties, while my father complained that I was wasting my career outside the family business. Meanwhile, I worked with legal professionals and financial investigators who helped trace the money through a complicated chain of shell companies, revealing that funds from unfinished construction projects had been diverted into private accounts and luxury purchases, while several investors had been given misleading financial reports designed to hide the growing hole in the company's finances. Then came the strangest discovery of all, because one of the shell companies had been used to purchase an expensive lakeside property under Julian's name, and hidden records suggested that the mansion my brother was about to receive was not simply a birthday gift, but part of a larger scheme to move valuable assets away from the company before creditors or investigators could reach them. My father believed he was protecting Julian and punishing me at the same time, but without realizing it, he was creating a perfect paper trail connecting his favorite son to the very transactions they had spent months trying to hide. That was why I did not react when my father handed me the worthless envelope, and that was why I smiled when my phone vibrated inside my purse just seconds after the applause began. The message came from my attorney, confirming that the investigators had obtained the necessary court orders and that several financial institutions connected to Bennett Urban Development were being notified that morning, meaning the birthday celebration my father had designed as a public demonstration of his power was about to become the place where that power disappeared. The first sign that something had changed came when the ballroom doors opened, and several investigators entered alongside representatives from the company's lending institution, causing conversations to die one by one until the entire room became almost painfully silent. My father stared at them as though they had walked into the wrong event, but when the lead investigator introduced himself and presented the official documents, Julian's confident expression vanished, and the silver keys to his new mansion suddenly looked less like a prize and more like evidence. "Claire, what have you done?" my father demanded, his voice low enough that only our family could hear, while my mother stepped between us and pleaded that we could solve everything privately if I would simply stop cooperating with the investigation. I looked at the man who had spent decades convincing me that I was worthless and calmly replied, "I didn't destroy your company, Dad. I stopped you from destroying my life and letting innocent people pay for what you did." And for the first time that evening, he had absolutely nothing to say. Over the following weeks, Bennett Urban Development unraveled piece by piece as investigators examined the records I had preserved. Lenders demanded answers, investors filed claims, and the hidden financial structure my father had spent years building finally collapsed under the weight of its own contradictions. Julian lost control of the properties placed in his name. My father was forced to surrender control of the company while the courts determined his financial and legal responsibility. And the same relatives who had laughed when I received an empty envelope suddenly began calling me privately, asking whether there was any way I could help them recover money they had trusted my father to protect. I never celebrated their downfall, because watching a family business disappear was far more painful than I had expected. But I also refused to accept blame for choices I had never made, and eventually I understood that walking away was not an act of revenge, but an act of self-respect. A year later, I opened my own financial compliance firm in Seattle, using everything I had learned to help small businesses detect fraud before it destroyed them. And when I moved into my new apartment, I framed that old grocery receipt from the birthday envelope above my desk. Not because it represented what my family thought I was worth, but because it reminded me that sometimes the greatest turning point in your life begins with someone underestimating you. If my father had handed me a mansion that night, I might have wondered whether I still needed his approval, but by handing me an empty envelope, he unknowingly gave me something far more valuable. The final reason to stop chasing acceptance from people who had never intended to give it. Please subscribe to our channel and share this video with your friends and family. We create entertaining and inspiring stories for our viewers, and your support helps us continue making great content for you.